This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1043, a conversation with Ariana Maher.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. This is your host, Adam Chapman. This is episode 1043. It's another conversation with Ariana Maher. She is an acclaimed letterer who, this episode, we actually do a creator commentary on Superman #1, as it was the recent relaunch for the Superman books, and she brought her A game and really developing the lettering style that she wanted to employ in that ongoing. Now, if you want to listen to my first conversation with Ariana, I would check out episode 1036, which was back in the beginning of April, about 2 months ago. This was a great conversation. It was really interesting to be able to go through the lettering choices, also figuring out, in some cases, what was actually not her work and what was actually the original artist's work, because of how in-depth and really into it the artist was. So this is a really fun and engaging conversation, and I hope you're really going to enjoy this. Upcoming episodes include an episode with Jason Liebig, which I'm very excited to present. That he was an editor at Marvel in the mid to late 90s, working in the X books. This is actually going to be the first conversation. He's going to be joining me again for a second one soon, so that's going to be some fun times. Upcoming episodes also include another conversation with Kelly Thompson. Unfortunately, the Paul Levitz interview is probably not going to be till July now. There was some scheduling complications on my end. Other stuff coming up as the end of June. We have another Book of the Month Club, this time looking at some of the earliest appearances of Alpha Flight in celebration of Canada Day. And what else do we have up? We have Jason Liebig coming back for a second one, even though the first one hasn't even dropped yet. We're going to have Ron Friends come back on sometime in July. So a lot of good stuff as we head into the summer. So thank you for listening to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. You can email me at comicshenanigans@gmail.com, rate the show on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and also listen to us on Spotify. And thank you so much for listening to the show. And let's jump right into the fantastic conversation with Ariana as we break down the lettering choices behind Superman #1. Enjoy. Ariana, welcome back to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's been a busy day, but I've been looking forward to this.
Excellent. I'm very excited about that. I guess we should mention, although by the time this comes out, it might feel like old news, but you were part of a book that just got nominated for an Eisner, so congratulations.
Thank you. I hope people will vote for, I think it's for Best Single Issue for Superman Annual 2023.
Does that particular issue stand out for you personally?
It does stand out for me. It was interesting because the same time I was working on that, we were doing a 2-part Night Terror storyline as well with Superman. And so they almost kind of bunch up in my mind. But that was the time I had a lot of fun with both comics. With Night Terror, I got to do some really kooky sound effects that I never tried before. And with the annual, I got to do some really fun elements that I don't know if anyone will notice, but just me. There's a big facade on the side of a building, and I moved the captions to be along the planes of the facade as opposed to directly just flat rectangles. That was fun.
Well, that's cool. I get when you do stuff like that, is it to kind of try to make it look more visually interesting, or just this would be a fun little experiment for me to do? As you said, unfortunately, most people may not even kind of notice it. They might kind of go by it, but and I think I asked you this before, how do you find new ways to kind of challenge yourself and add little extra details for yourself that maybe someone wouldn't necessarily notice when they're reading, but it adds to the experience?
I don't know if it's with most people or if it's just because I have ADHD brain, but I can't handle it when it's too boring for me, and I just like to liven it up. My brain will give me, while I'm working on something, I can do something the same way I've done it before, especially if I'm on a tight deadline. It's okay, let's just go this way. But usually I'm trying to set up a process that's fast so that when I'm actually in the weeds and I'm doing a thing, I can stop and say, I've got a little time, let me do something a little different. And sometimes it's not even me who comes up with the idea, but say the editor or the writer, and they'll suggest something and it's like, okay, let me see if I can do that. And I end up having fun as a result.
Mm-hmm. Now, today we're having you back for a specific reason. So there was a good friend of mine who listened to the show. He's like, I'd really be interested in kind of understanding how Ariana lays out like an issue. And so I thought, well, that's a great idea. Let's talk about that. So you were very much game for this. And so you kind of brought up that let's talk about Superman #1 in particular, which was part of the most recent relaunch, because as you had said before, you kind of had to kind of build your own, I can't remember the words you used, but, you're kind of developing what you're going to use for that series going forward right from the beginning, and being able to kind of set into motion certain ideas from a lettering perspective. So I thought it'd be really exciting to kind of go through an issue and kind of get a sense of how you laid this out and what kind of thought process you went by. So what can you tell us about the cover to start? Because this is, again, me being very naive. I would imagine that there's maybe not a lot for you to do on the cover, or maybe there's a lot. So was there discussion of, first of all, about how the Superman logo would look?
No, actually, to give you full behind the scenes on things, while we're going through the issue, I'll point this out to you too, because this in particular has a lot of elements that I think are cool like this. The cover, the logo, the way it's dressed on the hardcover as well. These are all done usually by production, or in Marvel, it's called the bullpen. I think for DC, you simply call them production. But these are the graphic designers that are in-house. They are paid as employees, and they often, many get credit for production design. But sometimes they get no credit. I think in this one, you don't know who did production. In Marvel, they often put production as an additional credit, especially when there's a lot of, they usually have a dedicated page for the credits, a dedicated page for the next issue, and sometimes we update it as letters. They'll just give us the materials and we update it, or sometimes the, production person updates it, but the people who design it are internal production, and they often are the unsung heroes of the comic making process, more so than letters, more so than colorists, more so than editors.
Fascinating. So there's really no connection for yourself on the cover at all?
No, in fact, when they were asking me to join the team, they already had the cover ready, and they showed it to me, and they're like, this is the series we're going to do. Aren't you interested? And when you see the cover, which is also on the cover of the hardcover, it's gorgeous. It's how could you not want to be on that project? Because it has the light and darkness. It has Superman coming right at you, an entire supporting cast. It's it just makes you excited looking at it. So, I remember when they had me on for Detective Comics, they were going to start the Ram V run. And the first thing the editor did was send me one of the variant covers, which was done by Yoshitaka Amano, who designed Final Fantasy, and I've gone to so many of his art galleries when I lived in Japan. I was like, I don't care, I have to work on it. So yeah, no, it's no responsibility of mine, but it is a responsibility of someone who put a lot of work in and often gets no credit in the industry.
Now, if you had seen this first, did you take any cues from what they had kind of put together in terms of a style, or was it very disconnected?
No. The first, whatever materials they send me at first, be it sketches, drawings, or in this case, the cover, and they told me who the artist is. I usually look up the artist to get an idea of things. That's usually when I start my process of deciding how am I going to establish the look and style for this series, because that's basically going to be the scaffolding, right? And my templates that I put every page into, and that's what I rely on. So that's when I start building the templates. I already know the page size dimensions because it's all the same for Marvel and DC, which helps a lot. When there's exceptions, the team has to tell me what the exceptions are in size. But I start with any page template, and I just start building out what font do I want to use, what what elements do I want to incorporate and always keep as options for this particular book. And like, I'll go over these as we go through the pages, but that's when I have to start thinking about the process. And honestly, when I agreed to this project and I started out, I was so intimidated because the first issue is always the hardest because that's when you have to build the scaffolding for the rest of the series to go through.
For sure. Well, I guess let's talk about that first page then, because I'm curious about some of the, again, more benign choices maybe on the page, but I'm sure you had a lot of thought process about it. So that first page, you have Mom and Pa Kent talking about Clark, asking him to turn down his music, and talking about, Pete Ross. And then you have this, at the very end, you kind of have Clark kind of putting down his glasses, I guess, and about to kind of jump out a window. So I'm curious about a few choices here. So, when you have Ma yelling for Clark, so you have this kind of red outline of her speech bubbles. Mm-hmm. So was that to kind of convey annoyance, anger? Like, again, that's obviously a decision that was made. I'm curious. Again, it seems so simple, but I'm curious about your thought process and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for these, it was even a smaller font before, but they had me emphasize it more because they just want Ma Kent to be more of the, shrewd to her teenage boy and listen to me. So it has to be out. And a lot of these balloons that are emphasized like this, we call them, double balloons because you're making another balloon around them with red. It's usually red. I kept it a dark red to kind of go with the rest of the color choices throughout the book. But I also changed the font style so that this specifically is yelling in the book. Like this is like top of your lungs. So since it's not used often, I can always go to this particular font to be the yelling font. And that way it can catch more attention than if you were to just bold the words. And that's also why I prefer not to use multiple exclamation points, which are sometimes in scripts. Like they'll put Kent and there'll be like 3 exclamation points. I tend to just do 1 because it takes up space and you already know it's emphasized because I made it big. Another thing I did is you notice there's these little markers pointing to the house and pointing to the second panel. And those little markers at the end of the tails are called squinks. It usually indicates that there's an interior sounds from somewhere and it's trying to go through like the window to get for you to hear that sound.
Oh, wow. I hadn't really thought of that. That's really interesting. Now, on the next, I guess on the third panel, then you start to have, Clark overhearing what his parents are saying, even though he's far away and he's kind of listening to music. So, and you have, these bubbles that are not connected to anything or not, so you can tell that it's kind of in the air, which is obviously something that you use later, when we have Lex talking to him, although you use a different, color around the bubble. So what kind of thought went into that bubble when you have a sound that someone is hearing from far away that is not normal? Because obviously that's what you're trying to convey.
Yeah, this one was interesting because there's different effects that can convey things easily. Like if the text is really small, but the balloon is really big, you can be like, oh, they're whispering because the text is so small and there's so much space there. But in this one, they didn't want whispering. They specifically wanted, the request from editors and Joshua, the writer, was that he has super hearing. So he's able to hear people as if they were right there in the room with him. But how do you convey that? But fortunately, with DC, I get to work with AI files, and there's two different formats. There's EPS and AI. EPS files, and AI means Adobe Illustrator. EPS is a different format in Adobe Illustrator. But usually with EPS, it's really difficult to incorporate transparencies. You have to use AI to use transparencies, because that one allows transparencies, EPS files don't. So a lot of times I avoid transparencies, but I could use them here. And since I knew I could use transparent balloons, I decided, okay, if I can use a double balloon to indicate there's a huge emphasis of sound, what if I made this double balloon outline transparent? So it's softer. So it kind of blends in with the background. So that way, if you're reading it and there's no tails indicating where the speaker is, you're going to infer that from both the text inside the balloons and from the way the balloons are displayed, that he's overhearing this with his super hearing. Or at least that was my intention.
I think it comes across. So Another question that I have then is that I'm guessing that the musical notes are you?
Oh yeah. It's just mostly making some musical notes. I think this was a Comic Craft style font. Yeah, this was Comic Craft. And I just wanted to keep it simple. Like, you can make musical notes really look vibrant and different, but this one is just like, he's just listening in his home, and it's really simple direct colors work, so I made them white. And then I just kind of faded them in the first one because you don't hear it very clearly. And then in the fourth panel, you can hear it a lot more clearly that he's listening to music.
If you were to actually play this, what would this sound like?
Random, because I am not a music major. And I'm terrified of anyone starting to complain to me that is like, oh, you got this wrong. But the only time I really adhered to music notes and really try my best to make it work is it's in an upcoming comic. There's in Marvel, it's a wedding, and there's a wedding march. And they're like, use the notes of the wedding march. And I'm like, oh, so I had to Google the notes of the wedding march.
Well, that's funny.
Yeah. So if there's a Marvel wedding issue in the next few months, you'll know where that's coming from.
Okay, excellent. So I guess on the next kind of pages you have what I imagine would also be a production page where you have the credits, etc., or is this you?
The credits is the production team, yeah. Which was a huge saving grace because I was so busy trying to get my head around this issue that designing the credits would have exhausted me. Because with Marvel, you don't design credits, you have production pages for the opening credits. With other comics like DC, most often you're designing the credits to be on the page, and I'm not the best at them. I will admit it. My tendency is, if we're doing a storyline, I will stick with that credit style for the whole storyline so I don't have to spend another hour to 3 hours trying to design something clever and new. You want something striking and new and out there, and it's like, whew. I realized that when I did the Tower for Detective Comics, it was one issue every week for 12 weeks straight. And it was a full storyline for the Tower. And I just was like, I can't redesign this every issue, so I just made one design, and I just went it for every issue. And I just changed the names of the creative team for whoever was drawing that book that week.
I mean, that seems to make sense, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes sense for me. I mean, maybe someone will be upset with me for not being that visually interesting at times, but I'm saving myself a lot of stress. And I can imagine production teams are either trying to come up with something new every issue, or they're like, you know what, we'll just go a tried and true route.
So the next, so once we get to the next kind of story pages, we have a beautiful shot that has Superman's kind of origin quickly kind of, unfurling before us on the left-hand side, which definitely reminded me of how Frank Quietly kind of did it in All-Star Superman in terms of kind of, everyone kind of gets it, so we don't really have to expand that much more on what his origin is. And then you have this beautiful
Grant
shot.
Morrison, once they did it the one time with a simple paneling, it's like, oh, we never have to do this again.
Right? Yeah. And it's kind of like, well, with Batman, I don't ever seem to see those pearls on the floor again. I think everyone's done with that. So
exactly.
Yeah, no, this was kind of a nice kind of retelling and nicely tinged with red. And then you have this very vibrant shot of Superman, protecting these people and saying he's got them. So I'm curious, first of all, I know you like special effects. So what was it like designing the Krakakum?
This, I really wanted to talk to you about this spread because I will never use this spread in my portfolio.
Oh, really?
I love this spread. I adore this spread. This is one of the best drawings Jamal Campbell has ever done for me. And I will never use it in my portfolio because he also designed the Krakakum.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You can't tell, but that's his. Whenever I get a chance, I put in my own sound effects, and if they told me put a Krakakum in, I would have. I think I would have done a fine job with it, but I think seeing Jamal's work on it and how he was able to incorporate the lightning into the outlines of the sound effect an artist is always better at doing sound effects than the letterer when they have confidence in their sound effects. So there are times when an artist will do all the sound effects themselves and incorporate it into the artwork, and I'm like, this is the best thing ever. Sometimes I have encountered artists who are not confident in their sound effects and just slap something on, and it's like, well, you already have the sound effect there, so there's nothing I can do. I can't edit it. If the editor wants it changed, they have to edit the artwork itself. So it's a double-edged sword. You either have a really, really talented artist doing a sound effect, or you rely on the letterer to do the sound effect for them. But this one, like, there's several spots where I do my own sound effects in this issue, for this issue, but this one was all Jamal's, and I think it's like one of the coolest things ever.
When you see it, does part of you go, well, obviously you love how it looks, but were you also kind of like, oh man, that's less I have to do?
When I saw the scene in the script and I saw the sound effects Krakakum, I'm like, I'm already developing ideas. It's like, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to lay this out? And then I get the art and I see the art and I'm like, well, this is better. This is better than I could have done. Cool. Okay, next page.
Right?
Yeah.
That's funny. So, one thing I as an aside, I love that, this first issue and actually the run in general has kind of brought Livewire back, because Livewire is an interesting character who kind of appears for a while and then kind of disappears. And obviously people who really liked her on the animated series, really have an affinity for her. So it's kind of nice to see that she's playing more of a part in the Superman books. So, that's always nice to see. Now on the next page, you actually get to, add a little bit of extra, to Livewire's, kind of announcement of herself. Livewire is officially supercharged, and you kind of add some special effects to her, the way she's speaking there. How difficult or how long did it take to kind of develop how Livewire's text would look when she actually talks like that?
There was a suggestion in the script to make it kind of special looking, so I just kind of played around with different font ideas, and I loved this particular font and how it looked, because it almost looked electrified itself. And I just was like, okay, I'm going to just treat this word balloon like a sound effect. And so I went through the same process as I would with any other sound effect. I outlined it. I put the strokes around it. Strokes are the black lines. So the stroke around it. And then I gave it a gradient to kind of give it that electric look. And since I received all the pages with colors already, it made it, because Jamal did all the colors as well, because they're amazing. Then it was that much easier to just choose which colors look best for it and fill it out. So it was just fun. It was just a fun little bit to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the next panel, you have the first suggestion that someone's speaking to Clark, and obviously we don't know at the time, but we quickly figure out that it's Lex. Was it always kind of, when you look at it, it kind of makes sense that it would be green, because, Lex obviously uses green in his armor, but also the idea of kryptonite and, this thing that is, Superman's weakness. So it makes sense that Lex would kind of be using green and co-opting green. Was that pretty early in the design process in terms of when he talks to Clark, always kind of having that kind of phantom green around it, or did it take you a while to come to it?
Oh, it was Joshua's suggestion in the script that that Superman uses his, super hearing to hear Lex. And it's mentioned in the script is like, we don't know who this is, but just so you know, it's Lex, and you're going to find out in the next page or so. And I was like, oh, okay. And since we had already problem solved the first page on, like, how does he listen to his parents with his super hearing, it's like, it made complete sense to use the same process and then use green. So it was once we solved one problem, it made the next problem really, really easy to solve.
Were there a bunch of greens you kind of ran through before you found the kind of the right shade that would make the most sense?
I mostly just went with a vibrant green, because that's how I associate him most, like a very green, because of animated series and stuff, I always associate green with him. But then I have to turn it semi-transparent anyway, so it the green kind of changes depending on what's going on in the colors of the scene behind it. So it didn't really matter too much as long as it was vibrant enough.
Now, this is such a naive and simple question, but in the next panel, you have Superman, talking quietly, just saying hush, right? So how do you decide how small to make something to show that you are just whispering at that time and you're not speaking audibly for someone else to hear you? That seems like such a amateurish question, but I guess this is my time to ask.
No, I mean, and if we're lucky and a aspiring letterer ever listens to this might be helpful, but usually I start with just going down a point size and see how it looks. I'll make a regular balloon with the regular text and go down by a point size and see if it creates enough air around the balloon to work. And if it's just not quiet looking enough, I'll go down a second point size. But I usually don't go further than 2 point sizes because you're at risk of it just getting kind of blurry. So usually 1 or 2 point sizes. Often 1 is enough. You also have to do the same with the leading if it's more than one word. If it's several lines, you have to be careful with the leading as well, and that's the space between text lines. I usually go down a point in that as well.
Now, with Livewire's text, it felt like, and it looks like you've bolded pretty much all of it, and I guess that's just because she's constantly yelling.
Yeah. Just following along with the script. Since he put it all in bold, it's in all caps, and it's okay, I'll just follow along.
Now, at the end of this page, is this, once again, the artist using the kakakum, or is this you?
Yeah, it is. And I love it. I can't use this page as a portfolio piece because people would assume I did this amazing sound effect, but I do really love the work I got to do on this page. But that last panel, it just looks great. I just love it. I love how it cracks all along through it. I think, could I emulate the same look with vector design as opposed to a hand-drawn design? Kind of. But I feel like it feels much more organic and true to itself to see the artist do it.
It's funny, as you mention it, I'm noticing things about how Jamal has done that in maybe a way that I didn't appreciate before, because you're right, it is organic to his art. He is manipulating the sound effect in the energy stream in a way that feels very natural. I didn't instinctively know that it was him. I just thought it was a cool effect.
Yeah. A lot of people just think of it as a cool effect, but when I saw this, it's I'm a fan for life. This is amazing.
On the next page, we have, there people are reporting on what, the fight is with Superman. Superman's still listening to Lex kind of talking. Now we see that it is him talking to him. There's a few things I wanted to mention in particular. I think it's on one of the smaller inset panels right near the bottom of the page where you have the bleed from the newscaster talking, and then we see that the newscaster's talking on the TV that Lex is watching. And so you have kind of merged the two because he's talking in one panel and then you're segueing into another panel, but you don't break off between the two the two boxes. So you kind of have it seamlessly following. What kind of thought process do you have to design to decide that, because he's still talking, I'm just going to naturally have this balloon flow in between these panels and actually connect the panels together? Well,
this way of bleeding into the gutters of the panel, which bleed into the gutters just sounds cool, but this style, even though it didn't, I don't know if you would say it originated from, but it's often called the Workman style because of John Workman, who's, I believe, still a very active letterer today. I tend to think of it as the Workman style of where you get to bleed into the panels, and it's usually done in comics where there's no black border, so it's really difficult to just cut off your balloon at the end when the balloon fill and the panel itself are both white. So I was just okay, I'm just going to bleed into the panels for this style until the artist changes or the colorist changes and there's more black borders. Since this is this borderless kind of white gutter, I'm just going to bleed into all the gutters. But then I got to this panel where he's talking, and then it follows into the next scene that he's talking. Usually I have to avoid the trouble of bleeding into one gutter and then the panel underneath it bleeding upwards into the same, because it'll indicate that the same person is talking, and that can get really confusing if they're different characters. But in this case, it was the same character, and it seemed like a really good transition point where you can just flow along with the balloons and not worry about it. So I just left it be. I don't know if it works or not, but it works for me.
I think it works, yeah.
Oh, cool.
A question I have, it's such a small detail, but on that first kind of panel before you bleed into the other, again, it is supposed to be on TV. It's a broadcast, so you do have like kind of, what's the word, almost like a ticker tape below Livewire's name and also below the actual newscaster himself. And then you have to kind of replicate that, but on an angle for the smaller one. I'm curious how you do that. And also, like, how did you decide on what kind of font to use to have it look like it is on TV?
This is one I think is another Jamal thing, but it's hard. It was hard for me to say immediately because I do this kind of thing all the time too. And, but I think Jamal did this because, you know, they're amazing artists and they love controlling the details. And I think that is incredible precision, like incredible. A lot of times artists, which I don't blame them, they have really tight deadlines. They really have to go at it. They'll do something like show a phone screen and they'll just make it blank and they'll be like, okay, let her do it. I've replicated so many text chats and things and done my best to fit it into this wide space, with what elements they give me to work with. But in this one, I think he did. Otherwise, if Jamal hadn't included it and it was up to me, it's pretty simple matter of like, I usually use Helvetica because that's usually what's used, which in this case, I believe it's Helvetica as well or something similar. And then, there is tools in Adobe Illustrator where you can, put perspective on these elements. So you usually just isolate them as objects and then like move them into perspective of whatever angle they're at.
Interesting.
Yeah. Also, yeah, I guess if we're going to go into next page, I'll just let you know ahead of time. The awesome slop sound effect, also Jamal.
No, I was going to say that felt like something that would have been yours.
It's so good. Would I have done it myself? Sure. Did he do it better? Most definitely. And I adore it. I wanted to discuss this issue in particular because so many elements, there are elements that are mine and so many elements that aren't mine. And I think it highlights not just lettering, but like artists who put so much thought and care into lettering as well.
Absolutely.
And that slop, it's so good because it gets the whole attitude of what that sound is, like choosing the kind of display of the text to get that feeling. And then all the little details like drawing on these like sloppy, drippy marks all around it. It's so good.
Well, moving on from that amazing slop, the Alexander Luthor prisoner number. Obviously I was in the script. Did they mention why 332849? Does that mean something?
Honestly, if it does, I don't think they let me know. It might be something specific that only the writer and the editor know. And if it's not important for me to know, I don't find out. So yeah, I just find it curious. Is it something that's going to play a part later? Kind of hope so. But until then, I don't know.
When you have a level of detail like this, is it more of a pain in the ass for you to be like, okay, now I need to know and make sure that this is always reflected and always kind of used in every scene with Lex? Like, is it more of a hindrance or is it more of like, oh, this is just an extra visual detail I get to add every time we see him?
Usually these kind of details are the consistency of the details. I don't have to worry too much about it because editors are trained to look for these details and make sure everything is consistent throughout the book. And that's really good because sometimes I'll catch something and bring it up to the editor and be like, hey, doesn't this character not have a left eye anymore? Or something silly like that. And they'll be like, oh, right, yeah, no, you're right, he lost it last issue.
Is there anything else on this page you'd like to draw my attention to?
Not in particular, just that like for electric balloons, the reason I designed them specific that way with the little jagged edges on either side is because it just works easier for the method that I letter. Since I letter with layering method, I just keep the markers for the electricity for the electric style of balloon on the same level as the tails. So the fill sits on top of it and it all looks like one balloon.
Gotcha.
I guess the next page is Livewire yelling again. I don't think they specifically told me to have her do her like electric style, but I just did it anyways and they liked it.
It seems very apt for the character.
Yeah.
Especially given our culture now and again what Livewire is and has been, it feels very much apropos for that character. So I'm curious on the next kind of panels down, when you have the introduction of Neo Kakoa, is that you? Is that Jamal?
Well, that's Jamal, because there's so much detail and thought put into it. Like, you can sometimes tell his work because there's going to be a lot of play with color, and it's a lot harder to incorporate details like light and shadow into the vector lettering. Like, you have to, like, cut out those details and layer them on top of each other at times. Otherwise, you can use gradients and things, but with him, he just incorporates them naturally as part of his art, which I think is great.
Now, was that in the script to actually include that? Do you remember?
I don't think so. I think it was an element where it was decided, oh, I'm going to make sure you know who this is.
Okay.
And
it's an interesting detail because, like, in the text, he says, like, nice to finally meet you face to face, Chief Kakoa, but it does add a cool little element where you actually kind of see this introduction. And again, it makes sense. It's issue 1, like we're setting up the world, we're kind of building out the supporting cast, but it was really interesting detail. But I was just curious about if that was Jamal original or if that had been in the script.
Yeah, and it's really great how it is parallel to Luther on the previous page, because it's a similar style panel and it just visually gives you the detail without it being like a full caption of text telling you what is going on. I think it shows how much confidence the writer has on the artist.
For sure. Now, the next panel below, you go back to the, having characters talk away from Clark, but he can hear it, so it's not quite a whisper, but it's again similar to what you had in the first page. But it feels like you did a slightly different color on the kind of the ring around it. Was there thought to kind of keep it separate from what Martha's would have been, because hers is more of a warmth, whereas this is more just strangers and it's kind of a more basic color? Was there any specific thought there?
I think it's some of the background color affecting the transparency to give it a slightly off-white look. But what I like is that it shows the ring around his ear to show that, like, he can listen. He can use a super hearing. But then it also shows the couple. I wanted to make their font small, so I brought down the font and the leading size down by a point. But instead of putting a lot of air around the balloon, I just made it a regular balloon and I gave it a regular black outline as I would any other balloon, because they're just talking to each other. They don't think Superman can hear them because they're pretty far away, but they're just talking to each other. But then I put the transparent outline around it so it can connect with the indication that he's using his hearing. So it was
I did like how Jamal kind of had that like semicircle around the ear as well.
Yeah. When I saw that detail, it's like, okay, I'll have to just do a hybrid of a whisper element with the overhearing element so that you can kind of try to connect both things at once. It's trying to use the visual cues so that the reader can figure out, okay, he's not supposed to be hearing that, but he can hear that.
Mm-hmm. Now, when we get to the next page, is the tap, tap, tap Jamal as well?
Honestly, I don't remember. I think it is. I'm going to say it is. I think just to be safe, I'm not going to take credit for this one. Because I always say this because I would do it the exact same way. It's been a year. But that's exactly how I would do it. I'm gonna say he did it, just to be safe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It does feel like something you would do, though.
Oh yeah, no. If the page was given to me without sound effects, that's exactly what I would do. I would weave it through the page and then have it come to the forefront. And it's very natural, and it really brings it together in such an easy visual storytelling. So I think he's brilliant for that. And if it's me, good for me, but I'm pretty sure it was him.
The next page has a lot of design elements I really like. One, you bring back, the motif of the musical notes because you have Clark kind of with headphones, which actually makes total sense for someone like that if they're actually focusing on work, given that they can hear everything. Being able to drown it out with music makes a lot of sense. So I really like that use of kind of that motif coming back. Another thing I liked, which I was curious about, was you have the, written by Clark Kent, kind of an inset, and then you do it again with the photo by Jimmy Olsen as kind of a way of reintroducing our main characters and what they do. Was that all in the script? Was that an idea of yours?
I think these I could have put in, but I think those were Jamal just inserting additional elements into the story.
Oh, so it wasn't you?
No, yeah, he put that in, and I think he also put the Pete Ross mix as well.
Okay, yeah.
Some of these, like often with artists, I don't receive any text elements with their work. They don't include sound effects. They don't include text elements. I just put everything in. But on occasion, an artist has a lot of control, and that's what I really love about this issue, is that he wanted to establish these additional layers that doesn't have to be indicative. And all I did that was much of a callback was the same musical notes that he's listening to on this page are the same beat notes from the previous one. So, because I think Clark would be someone who's listening to the same music he would listen to when he was a teen.
Absolutely. Now, did you or Jamal design the Smallville on the hat?
He did. Yeah, he did. I love that.
he knows that you're working on this book too, right?
Yeah, but I'm not selfish over it. Like, I like when an artist gets really invested into the lettering too. And it's really, really rare. I mean, there's a lot of artists who appreciate letterers and think of letterers in their work. You can tell by how much ease I have in doing placements and problem solving on their artwork. But Jamal especially is enthusiastic and puts these amazing design elements in himself. And I love that. So, yeah, no, though, does he know I work on his book? I don't know. I don't know if any art team knows who I am. Honestly, he probably doesn't know who's working on his book, so he might as well be like, well, I want to make sure this turns out perfect. So he does it himself.
So the next aesthetic I wanted to ask about, so at the end of this page you have who ends up being Lois off screen saying, think again, Olsen. So here he was actually red text, but then on the next page you go back to traditional text and having the red just as the extra balloon around the main balloon. What kind of led your thoughts there? Was that, again, something more in the script? Was that kind of your own design choice to really emphasize exactly how Lois is speaking and then reverting back to what we're used to seeing from kind of more stern speaking language? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I did it in such a different font and just such a different style, just my own, because I wanted her to when she wants to get everyone's attention, she goes a higher register than just a normal yell or like listen up everybody. Instead, she's just like wailing out. So I wanted it to stand out in a different way. So switching the colors out can really do that. And then her going back to a normal double balloon yell, because you want to have some kind of baseline to go with. You can have like a baseline, it's text and double balloon, okay, that's a yell. If the font is different and it's more organic looking, then that's like a more emotional yell. And then when it's this yell that she's doing in big block letters, it's like, I'm in command of this room kind of yell.
Now, I am cognizant of the time because I've already used up almost all of our time and we're less than half of the way issue through. Are there specific things about this issue that you wanted to speak about or kind of bring to my attention?
Well, we've gone through a lot of the major things, so I can just skim through the pages with you and we can talk about each. This page with Lois being presented, that is Jamal's amazing design element to have the editor-in-chief glass. I think that's amazing. For whisper text, that's how I do whisper text. It's 1 point down on each. This one I really like on the next page where she is bullying Clark as she usually does. And there's this point where he's like, there's no one better than you to be our editor-in-chief, Lois. And she has this little growly balloon. Mm-hmm. I love the little growly balloon because it's just me scribbling on the page. I don't know. I just really like that. I like a chance to use that.
Excellent.
Next pages are pretty straightforward. It's just dialogues between them. Him on top of the building and them talking, going over everything. So it's anything that stands out for the most part. But when he zooms over to LexCorp and it's undergoing its change, and he sees it change over to SuperCorp, we go a few pages ahead to where Mercy is telling him is like just one of the many tools at your disposal here at SuperCorp. They specifically told me it's like, we want this to look like a corporation logo. And I was like, okay. And at first I was going to sit down and really design something, but then I realized there's already something that works, and it was made by Comic Craft. In there, they have a font, kind of, I don't know if it's called Up, Up, and Away or Man of Steel. I don't know. But it already has these yellow, red, and black elements that have exactly the style I needed. Like, I'd never used this font because it already has color elements in it, and it's really not that useful to use because you want to incorporate your own colors based on what the book is. But this one just happened to have it, and I'm like, if there's a shortcut, I'll take a shortcut. And so SuperCorp was based off a Comic Craft font. Like, just typed it in and it worked, and I was like, oh yeah, that works.
I want to flip back a few pages just for a second because I'm guessing I know the answer. But when you have the scene where Clark and Lois are talking on top of the building, and you have one shot where you do see the Daily Planet, kind of the giant planet and the words, is that again another Jamal kind of adding in the Daily Planet effect, or is that you?
Most definitely Jamal. You thought I was going to use this issue to gloat about me, didn't you?
There's a lot of things I had questions about, and it's very interesting to see them, as you said, kind of the breakdown of, you know, when an artist is kind of taking control of some of those design aesthetics and actually implementing them in their art, because as you said, not all artists do that. So it is interesting to be able to kind of draw that distinction between how you and Jamal both worked on the book. So it's actually been quite fascinating for me to kind of see what your thoughts are on it and what, you know, he ended up actually doing on his own and kind of decisions between them. Yeah.
And to go back to the SuperCorp page where she's introducing it, the part where you show her name tag of Mercy Graves, that's his design. It's great. Okay. The little beep sound effect at the end, that's mine.
that I had a feeling.
Yeah, that one's simple, clean. I didn't want to put outlines around it because it doesn't have to be too loud or too like, and I usually go with the color wheel when I want a color to pop. So since it's blue, I use a little yellow and it pops.
What makes you put the E and the P a little higher than the B and the E at the beginning? Because there's a slight difference, right?
Yeah, I don't like seeing it too even together because sounds are not so harmonious usually. Like when a character is singing, they can kind of flow up and down and so forth. But when it's just like a sound effect, I tend to give them more jagged positions. Mostly because that is common lettering language that we're taught by other letterers to use, like keep them at equal distance to each other, but kind of move them up and down a little bit to give them a less taxed look to them, but or a less like just typed in kind of look to them. It gives them a bit more liveliness. It gives them a bit more energy. But yeah, sometimes when I'm like, oh, why do I lower this E and why do I raise the other one? It's like completely I feel this looks good, so I'm going to do this.
Is there a lot of kind of are you doing like minor tweaks to be like, just to kind of find the right kind of feel? Or like, do you go through a bunch of permutations to kind of wait till it kind of hits you in a certain way? Or is it usually like you've been doing it obviously long enough that is it more instinctive that you can kind of like, oh, this will probably work, and then it'll kind of be on your first, try?
Sometimes sound effects, like, I'm just not satisfied for it, so I'll tweak on it a lot longer than I should, like maybe a whole 10 minutes. But for the most part, I try to rely on just instinct after many, many years of futzing around with sound effects and positioning sound effects and manipulating them, being like, this feels good? Okay, we'll do this.
Now, I'm going to flip forward a few pages, but when we get to the introduction of LL01, which is the holographic display of Luther in the style of Jor-El, was that design aesthetic, like when you did it, I guess you were saying that you kind of already had color artwork, so it makes sense that you would tailor kind of not just the balloon, but also the font color to the actual color that was used for the LL01 construct, correct?
Oh, yeah. I just simply used you can use a color drop effect to like take a sample of the color in the artwork, which that's part of why I really love getting color artwork, because I can use a color drop to capture what kind of colors are being used and either use that exact color or something similar, or use the idea of that color and use the complete opposite on the color wheel to try to either make it pop or to try to make it seem like a part of the same element. So that's just me color touching with that scene.
Okay. Now, on the next page, I feel like I'm going to have to start playing a game of is it you or is it Jamal? But we do have a sound effect at the first panel, and also a sound effect near the bottom where you kind of hear someone screaming. How much is you and how much is Jamal?
Okay, we'll play a game. What's your guess for the first one?
I think that's Jamal.
And the second one?
I think that's you.
I did both. It's hard to tell sometimes, yeah?
It is, because now I have all these other thoughts in my head about like how it operates. So I think the fact that I thought the first one was Jamal is just the highest compliment.
Yeah. No, I take that as the highest compliment. I love that sound effect because it's a really simple thing that letterers can do, where we can cut behind elements if we isolate those elements and clip behind them. So this is one where I could have clipped the entire sound effect behind him flying, the big Cthulhu, but I just thought, what if he just went through the two O's? And I've done that sometimes in the past too with other characters in other comics where they just kind of fly through the letters in the scene. So it's like, it's a simple little thing, but it always gives me a joy to do. And then
actually, before we move on from it, I think part of the reason why I thought maybe it would have been his is, and this is again, I guess, just this testament to your own skill and thought process, is that because you have those ringed effects from him kind of entering almost like a sonic boom as he leaves Supercorp, that's kind of why I thought that it might have been his, because it felt like it was perfectly positioned in between. It felt like exactly right. And again, as you said, kind of he arcs right through the double O's. So it felt very, like, that's why I thought maybe this had been designed by the artist, because you had those ring effects on each end.
Yeah, exactly. And when I was looking at those ring effects, and since it's so far away and the lines are so thin for those ring effects, I also made the sound effect thin, because it doesn't need to be a big, like, thick line sound effect when the other sonic boom effects are so delicate. Excellent. So it kind of works that way. And then the A scream, I kind of gave it a semi-transparent outline so that it's his super hearing that's hearing it.
I do like, again, as you said before, like kind of how you almost have like a staccato rhythm to the E's, especially at the beginning, because you have them, again, they're not on the same line with each other, and you kind of do that a little bit more with the I's too. It's a really interesting way of kind of viewing that sound effect. You
kind of just eyeball and position each of the characters so that you're like, okay, this is uneven and jagged, and you kind of getting that emotional feel of a scream, because a scream being a solid, like, all on the same line doesn't have the same energy as it just going up and down. I have a very particular question about that. In the script, does it actually spell out how many E's and how many I's? It usually does. I will edit them sometimes, depending. Sometimes I just put them all in. If I can fit them all in, no big deal. Sometimes and a writer will get really enthusiastic and put in like 12 eyes, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to cut that down a little bit. One thing I always edit is the number of K's being used, because sometimes when you're like crack and there's like like it's KRAC or KRAKKK, and I'm like, no. So I'll just like either make it one less K or two more K. You know what I mean?
Are there times in general when you, and again, I'm already over time, so I apologize, but are there times in the script where, and not necessarily for Superman, but for other books you've done, where the sound effect isn't defined? Like, is there ever a time where you kind of talk with the writer and they don't know what sound effect they necessarily want, and you get to kind of workshop ideas with them, or is it always in the script?
It's usually always in the script. When they say, oh, put a loud sound effect here, like I could, there are times where it's like, if I just want to save myself the trouble, I could just put boom in there, because they're usually going to say boom. But otherwise, I'd like for them to define what the sound is, because otherwise I'm writing the comic with them. And it's like, I'm not paid writer's fees. I'm going to push this back and be like, what do you want? Tell me what you'd like. Have fun with this. But usually it's sometimes it's a little dull when it's like always guns always go bang, 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 and it's kind of nice if they change it up. But most times I rely on the writer to tell me what they want on there. And sometimes writers really, really want to think and use onomatopoeias, which I think is awesome. And sometimes they're just like, do this. But when they're just like, this has a sound to indicate that it turned on or something, and it's like, just tell me it says beep, and I'll put in a beep.
Now,
before we get to the end of the comic, I do want to point out one page I really liked, and it was the little cartoon Superman introducing Supercorp.
Mm-hmm.
That one I actually changed. I changed the font style to be more cartoony, and I also lapped the balloons on top of each other, and then cut out a space in between them so that it could look more like a 1950s style balloon where they used to draw on top of each other's balloons. Oh. They would draw a balloon, then draw another balloon. They just wouldn't ink the part that connects the two balloons.
Got it.
So that was fun.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it was just like, and I also made the stroke line a little thicker than the rest, so that you can indicate that it's like, this is just like a cartoon. This is more goofy looking.
Once you mention it, like, it is very clearly different. I don't know if I clocked it as much at the time, but yeah, no, it's a very interesting point.
I honestly don't think anyone clocks into any of the styles I use in my lettering. So I just like, when I letter, I do it for the creative team. That's they're going to be the ones who notice it, so I'll just make it for them, and whatever they like, that's good. That way I don't feel overly invested in how I design things. Like, if I put so much time and effort to a design and then the editor says, I don't like it, and then I'll be like, but it's for the people. And it's like, no. The editor doesn't like it, I'll change it.
Fair. So, one of the, I guess, last kind of more signature aesthetics that you bring in is the way that the parasite speaks. And not just the parasite, but also that people were kind of infected in that same way. And so it does have that very kind of haunting, kind of zombie-ish kind of fashion. One, was the color choice pretty easy for you? Because obviously he is kind of a purplish character. And two, how did you decide which of the words to kind of have that kind of haunted look to it, especially the hungry? Like, the hungry very much stands out.
Yeah, I think when I did Gimme That Juice, I decided on a specific font, like a big kind of jagged looking font for it to look kind of rocky and meaty looking. And I guess they liked the look of it, because when I later did Hungry, they were like, no, we like that kind of style. So I incorporated it into the rest, which looks nice and creepy. And when I did the double balloons for when he's yelling, it's like, I don't need to put outlines on it. I just need to make the purple bigger, because the purple already stands out against the background. Mm-hmm. I had to choose a purple, but I couldn't choose too light a purple, because then it might not print well, or it might look too faded for people to read, especially if they deal with issues like color blindness. It can be difficult. So I try to make sure that the text colors are dark, but like they're still the color that I want them to be in.
I've always found it funny because I am colorblind. It's not severe, but I do have color blindness, and so once in a while, like I'll have a friend being like, "You read comics? You don't even know what color Spider-Man is." I'm like, "Shut up." That's pretty harsh, but for the most part, I think I understand the color choices that you made. So at least for my color blindness, it worked.
I try to go for high contrast whenever I can, but sometimes styles are already determined by someone else, and I just have to roll with it. So sometimes I'm like, that might be hard to read, but sometimes a different team, creative team decided that for that character, so I just have to incorporate their style into this book, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. When Superman's fighting against Parasite, is the boom again Jamal?
Oh yes. Could I have done
more? I guess if it's more intertwined with the art, I guess that's the tell, right?
It can be, though in this case, I think I could have done the same thing. If I took extra time, would it have taken me longer than how he incorporated it? Yes. But I think that's usually a tell when you can see it intertwined with the art. Either that or the letterer took a lot of extra time to cut out those elements and make it pop. So often it's the letterer, but in this case, it's all Jamal, and I love that boom. I absolutely adore that boom because
it's a great style. There's something about it.
It's positioned big, and then all of the wind elements on top of it. So good.
Now, on the kind of next spread on the bottom, you have a lot of different little panels. You do have one with the sound effect, with the kind of record scratch. It's interesting, right? When you develop these sounds, and often the way that you kind of put them, you try to kind of ride the wave of what that would actually sound like. So how did you have to ride the wave of a record scratch? Because that's a very specific type of sound.
Yeah, this one, it was like, I wanted it to be a little rough, and so I didn't want it to be too thick or too heavy a sound. It had to be a small sound. So I went with a brush effect looking, so that it had those jagged kind of edges to it. And then I just used some color, like I used the lighter colors that are on that panel to kind of dictate how the fill's going to be, so that it pops out against the darker green background. So yeah, I think it came out nice. It's something simple, something clear, so that you know what it is when you look for it. But I think for me, I don't put too much effort into small sound effects, as long as they naturally feel like, okay, this fits in the scene, because sometimes people will notice it's there, sometimes they won't notice it at all. The important thing is that the element has the feel of the scene.
Now, and design elements on the last page, which is really creepy, is obviously you have the red musical notes. So we were used to seeing musical notes throughout the issue because you had Clark listen to music that we imagine is, more restful, or at least not this. And this is obviously much more creepy because of the red. I'm curious either about the direction or how much of that was up to you to kind of decide to really enhance the creepiness by adding in that kind of bloody color.
Oh, that was, it said to put musical notes in there, so I had my fun with it. But the little elements I decided was I was going to use the same musical notes as I did on the fourth panel of the first page, and in the scene where Kent has his headphones on, to just kind of like tie the scenes together, that they're listening to the same music in some creepy way. But also, I made them red because that stuck to me more than just using white to come out of the scene. It seemed white music notes seemed too light and welcoming for the scene itself, so I made them red. And then I also took I isolated them and put in an element to make them a little rougher, so that they look like they're kind of bloody notes, there's something wrong with them. They're very discordant.
It's a very cool effect, especially as you said, especially if it's the same music, but it's somehow creepier and weirder.
Yeah. Creepier and weirder.
Very cool choice.
For. Yeah.
Now, the end of the issue where you have the to be continued in Night of the Parasite, that is you?
That is me, yeah.
Because now I'm rethinking everything about what's Jamal, what's production. Like, I'm coming at this and with clear eyes now.
A lot of interior elements, especially when you see credits on DC Comics and they're on the art page, that is the letterer. When you see credits and they're not on the art page, they're on a separate dedicated designed page, that's usually production. And with Marvel, we often don't put credits on the art page. We'll put them on a production page instead, and either the bullpen or the letterer will update them per issue. But this was me just designing the to be continued. I usually design all the to be continued, or sometimes we're doing a new storyline right now with Superman, and they finally asked me to do the credits page, so I did the elements, but it's in a crossover with a series by another letterer, so I actually asked them if I could get in contact with the other letterer and we could share elements between each other. So that way we don't have to make two completely different credit styles or do things two completely different ways for the character styles. So
is that kind of unusual that in general, that you would have a letterer from one book kind of wanting to reach out and talk to another letterer to ensure that there is, some sort of, synchronicity? Like, is that common when books cross over, or is it more unusual?
It's not common for most publishers. It's not common because they have so many different freelancers working at different paces that it's really not common. But I usually, if I have a chance and I can ask to do it, I ask to do it because letterers tend to be very welcoming and want to help each other out. And it also goes with consistency of style, especially when a book is bleeding into two different comics. To have that consistency is very reassuring for both letterers to rely on each other for that. And the other letterer, Dave, he was fantastic to work with. He was really receptive on ideas, and we played a few ideas off each other just to make those elements work for both books. I loved it. It's probably going to have a special place in my heart once it goes out, but I can't tell you what series it's yet. Okay. When it's Marvel Comics, however, working with the different, since we all work under Chris's guidance, we always rely on each other for a lot of things. Not just carrying each other if someone has to take the day off and go to the doctor. It's also hey, how does Venom sound like now? And then we share elements with each other. And that's a huge help because you're saving time and you're keeping the style consistent throughout all the books. That's part of why the House of X and the whole Krakoa era really worked in a lot of ways, is because of Tom Mueller's design direction, the bullpen carrying that direction forward, and then the letterers going forward with keeping everything consistent.
Absolutely. It's actually almost hard to imagine what the post-Krakoa books will feel like because, Mueller's stuff was so omnipresent. The text pages, everything, they really went all in on that design aesthetic, which really, kind of kept that whole run feeling as cohesive as it did because, as you said, it retained that design element across every book in that line. And now that it's not going to have that anymore, it's going to be fascinating to see what it looks like.
Yeah, I really love that era. It was something special to me. I don't know what the new era is. Currently, I'm not assigned to any X books, unfortunately. I hope I do get to be one day, but but that was really special. Getting to work on a few of the comics within that era was so cool. It was so much fun. Did you get the promo page at the end of your comic? I have it in the graphic novel. I don't know if you got it in the single issue of Coming to Superman.
Yeah, coming to Superman. Yeah, I do have that page.
Yeah, the Coming to Superman. The Superman text was from production. They actually sent me the design element for it. And then I took the vector and I just popped it in. But the Coming to, Danger, Horror, Adventure, those text elements were me. I just had to imitate their style so they look like they all flow together. And then the word bubbles with the green on black. Personally, I wouldn't put green on black because it's hard to read, but this is already a pre-decided design element for this specific character. You can't change that. So I just went with it. But they also wanted me to make it glitchy on the first page. like make it look glitchy. And that was so difficult.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I overlaid it with a lot of semi-transparent layers in the background, like reds and blues, to show that kind of glitchiness of it. And then the text itself is just, it all looks slightly off in the details because I also had to overlay a glitchy element to them. But at the same time, I couldn't go too weird because you have to be able to read it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it took a lot of work.
I have a random question which doesn't specifically relate to this, but it makes me think of, in the early 2000s when you had the Ultimate the Ultimate Comic line at Marvel, they had, fonts where suddenly you had mixed case. So instead of just having the traditional all uppercase, you also mixed in having lowercase, and it definitely set that book apart. From a letterer's perspective, does that seem more trouble than it's worth to you, as opposed to having, just block all caps?
It's not a huge problem unless the writer decides to do the script in all caps, which most don't do anymore. But if they say they base their style off of scripts from like Alan Moore or something, you're going to see a lot of all caps, and it's like, oh no, I can't work with this, because then you have to retype everything to make it work. So that's kind of a pain. It also can be a pain sometimes when you're getting revision notes and the notes themselves of like, hey, replace this balloon with text with this balloon text, and then the balloon text in the notes from the editor are also in all caps. And it's like, it's like, they're not yelling. Why are you making me yelling? I have to retype them. So sometimes it's a pain, but when you create graphic styles and character styles for the fonts, and you tie those character styles to, like, I have a Stream Deck and I have actions that I've programmed into Illustrator. I take those actions and I tie it to the Stream Deck. Now I press a button and the word is bold in the style I need it to be for that specific template. It used to be I would have to bold them manually. So whether it's all caps or whether it's mixed case, it doesn't matter as long as I program the right designs into that template.
Talking about this last page of Superman with the kind of the coming soon, was that, I guess, all in the script that you would have the dialogue from Brainiac kind of obscuring the danger, horror, adventure, like, because it almost feels like you're progressively covering more of that kind of bombastic narration. That was all in the script? Yeah.
That was part of the glitchiness to make it seem more unsettling. And I think I was revealing a bit too much of the background, and the editors were like, no, cover more. So there's certain elements that are just like the editors being like, no, I want more of that feeling.
Now, and I'm getting on the final page where you have, Brainiac kind of far in the distance, and we have his dialogue. Is it production adding in the continued in the dawn of DC?
No, that was me. They give me certain elements. They did. I don't remember because I have the hardcover and they took out the Dawn of DC. But I think what they did was production gave me the logo for Dawn of DC, and then I just created the text around it to say it's continued and stuff like that. I just tried to match up the colors with how it's supposed to look all together. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, again, I have to thank you for taking so much time. We're way over time. So I have to thank you, and I'm more likely to also thank your husband's indulgence. So he's been waiting.
I will convey your kind words. Because I can smell chicken cooking downstairs. I really am excited.
Excellent. Well, is there any final notes you wanted to kind of give about Superman 1?
This was a issue that will always have a special place in my heart, and not just for the work I put into it, but because of such an amazing artist and writing team and like really cool editors I got to work with on this. It was just like one of those books where I got to work on that like 12 years before when I read Thor the Mighty Avenger, I'd always wished I could work on. A book where I got to work with a creative team and make something special. So yeah, that's why I chose this issue, because I felt very included in the creation of something amazing, but I also felt like I was watching people do something extra amazing, and I was like doing my best to keep up.
It's definitely been such a fun read because just from a writing perspective, it really feels like Josh gets Superman, and not everyone does, for various reasons, but there's just such a warmth to his take on the character that just feels very apropos. And then Jamal, again, just kills it on art and really seems to be relishing every moment of the assignment.
Yeah, exactly. I feel as soon as I read the first page of Joshua's script, you could tell this is someone who really, really wants to capture the heart of Superman and not just try to subvert the idea of Superman. And I really love the pure idea of Superman and how Superman works within his world, because he's a warm, welcoming, loving character. And the more you emphasize that, the more fun a book so light can be. And Jamal just like carries it to the next level. This has been a fangirl podcast.
It's the Jamal Love Fest, you know?
Yes, exactly.
Well, again, Ariana, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This has been an absolute joy, breaking down this issue with you. And so thank you so much for your insights and, for really kind of pulling back the curtain. And, really, I honestly felt like I learned a lot about the process and what we were kind of, faced with here. So again, I really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. And if anyone ever has questions about lettering or my work on this series, or just are looking to make comics on their own and want to talk to someone in the industry, they can find me on Blue Sky at AIRY for Airy, or they can find me on my website, arianamaher.com. That's my portfolio, and they can just contact me on my contact form.
Excellent. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you.